Hello everybody. I'm going to hop back into my product shot project and start working on getting this unwrapped. My geometry is looking really good. From the previous tutorial, I've done a revolve using a curve that I created in Illustrator. Now what I want to do is start thinking about getting the geometry just perfect before I even consider doing a UV unwrap. So I'm just going to take a look around my geometry to make sure I'm really happy with it. Now I'm currently in smooth mode, so I've tapped the 3 key. I can look at my geometry without smoothing by tapping 1, and I'm not entirely satisfied with what I'm seeing here. For example, this little lump over here is not round enough for my liking. So now is the time to go in and do that extra work. I'm going to insert an edge loop. I tapped the 1 key. Now when you're working with edge loops, you have to click on the edge that is perpendicular to the edge that you want to create. So for example, if I wanted to create a span around the top here, I'd have to click on these edges going up and down like so. Now, I don't need it here, so I'm going to undo that. I want one in here. And you can do this while you're in smooth preview mode, so I just tapped the 3 key again. And I'm just going to add an edge loop there. And you can click and drag with the left mouse button to position it exactly where you want. And once you generate it, it's selected so you can jump right into, say, scale mode and start manipulating it. So I'm just going to scale it out a bit, and I'm going to move it up. And that's nice. This one here, this edge all the way around, because I'm in quads, everything's nice. I can double click on that, and it selected the edge all the way around. It selected that edge loop. I could drag this up. And I think I'm starting to be happy with what should be the edge of my glass jar's lid. Now, because of the nature of having one edge around the top here, I can see that when I go back into my non-smoothed view, I only have one edge along the top, so I don't have any thickness in my glass yet. So I'm going to tap 3. I'm going to double click using my insert edge loop tool. So I'm going to click and drag on one of these edges that are going up and down to create something that spans around. So I've got my insert edge loop tool here under mesh tools. And I'm going to click and drag, clicking with my left mouse button on one of the edges perpendicular to the edge I want to create. Position it where I want it, and then I'm going to immediately, because it's auto-selected, I'm going to tap the R key to scale it and start to think about bringing that in to give my glass some thickness around the top. Now I want to make sure that all of my modeling is done. Go into edge mode. All of my modeling is done before I start thinking about unwrapping this. That's good. Go into object mode. And I can start to look around to make sure there's no problems with my mesh. Yes, I've done this a couple of times, so I can see down below there's a problem here. When I did the revolve, the system did not figure out, Maya did not figure out to connect these two verts. So I just right click, I'm going to go into vertex mode, I'm going to highlight those two vertexes like so. And then under Edit Mesh, I'm just going to connect them, like so. And that fixes up that problem. Chances are the same problem is on the inside. And it is. I can see that here. I'm going to highlight that one, Shift, and click on the other one, and then I'm going to connect them. And this is important right now to start thinking about all of the issues that could come down the pipe later on when you start to do your UV unwrapping. You want to make sure that your modeling's done. You're satisfied with what you're looking at. So I fixed up the roundness of that lid. I've got some more thickness in my glass, and I'm really happy and ready to move forward. I want to show you something really powerful. I know that the majority of this object is going to be glass. So I can think the glass itself doesn't need to be UV unwrapped as much as I need to have the label area unwrapped. So what's critical for UV unwrapping is that you think, I'm going to be positioning a texture there, not just a procedural texture like you'll see here in a moment when I select one of the default Arnold textures, but I'm going to be needing to paste onto this surface out here a bitmap. So something I'm going to create in Photoshop, something that I'm going to create in another tool like Illustrator. So it's going to be a bitmap on the surface here where I want my label to go, but everything else is going to be glass. So it's not hypercritical that I spend an awful lot of time making the UVs perfect for what's going to be glass. So here's a very powerful tip. I can select faces. Now, when we're doing UV unwrapping, we usually start by selecting faces. And unfortunately, I can't just shift double click into this grouping of polygons here like I can here. If I highlight one and I shift double click, it'll do a perfect ring because they're nice clean quadrangles and the topology, as we call it, is just right. Unfortunately, when I click here and shift double click on the one beside it, it doesn't want to go all the way around because they're not quads. And this is one of the problems with triangles or n-gons, is because the system of edge loops and things like that tends to fall apart. So I gotta shift and click on those polygon faces like so. But watch this cool factor. Under the select option up here, I can choose to grow, and it's such a good tool that they've given us a nice shortcut key, which is the greater than symbol. When I hit grow, the selection will look for the polygons closest to it and continue to grow. So if I hold shift and press the period button, which is the greater key, watch, it just grows, grow, and this is all going to be glass, right? So I'm just going to grow that out. Whoops, don't want to move it. Undo. I'm going to shift and press the period button to grow this all the way around to the point where I know the glass ends and my label starts. I'm going to right click, and I could right now assign a new material. Yeah, let's do that. Let's try this. I'm going to assign a new material to those faces specifically. And I am rendering with Arnold, so I got to pick Arnold shader, and this is going to be my AI standard surface, like so. And I'm going to immediately jump over here and look at my attribute editor. Now, lots of work has been done on this model, lots of revolving, lots of poly tweaking, et cetera, and I'm seeing this is a very large history in here. So we need to get in the habit of hopping over to the poly modeling shelf and clicking these two buttons from time to time. We got to freeze the transformations, and we need to delete the history. That's what this button is here. And when we click that, it will clean up all of our edges. So let's go back into object mode, highlight our object, and before I do anything else, I'm going to clean up all of these nodes up here. I'm just going to click on this button here. Ah, nice. Very nice. And it says there's Lambert 1 and there's AI Surface 1, because AI Surface 1 is currently being used for all of those polygons that I currently have selected. The ones that I just selected, I applied that to. So we've got two materials. We've got the AI standard surface, which is actually my texture, and I'm going to use some really good language here for my glass. That's my glass. So just to be sure, I'll show you that again. Go back to my faces. Press the F key to zap in there. Shift F will focus on things. I'll try to do this as fast as I can. I could click and make a box. Tap the F key to focus on that. I'm going to zoom out. I'm going to shift the period button, which is the greater than symbol, which is grow. Grow, 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 like so. and then right click, assign a material. That's what I did before. Actually, I went further than that, I do believe. Yep, I grew it all the way down to here to where my label is going to start. Right click, and I assigned a texture. Now what's cool is you can assign existing materials like the one I've created prior, which is the texture glass. So in theory, I can use that again on these polys down here. I know that this is going to be glass. Select tool. Now the reason I'm doing this and not just clicking and dragging a box is because you can accidentally highlight stuff on the other side, right? But there is a trick to making sure that you don't select items that are not in the camera's view. And for those power users, I'm holding down Shift. See the little plus pops up when I hold the Shift key down. Now I'm doing this with my selection tool. You gotta have your selection tool on. Shift, right click, and then down here under Polygon Display, Shift, right click, Polygon Display, toggle backface culling. That means don't select stuff on the other side. So I just clicked and dragged a box to select stuff. Now when I look on the inside, oop, kind of surprised that shouldn't have selected that. Let me just try grabbing these guys here. Well, let's look on the inside. Did it select stuff? Let me just make sure I'm deselecting everything. You know, sometimes this can be really finagly. That should not have selected on anything on the other side. Oh, let's try it again. Right click, Polygon Display, toggle backface culling. Maybe I already had it on and I just turned it off. Now let's try that again. Click and drag a box on the polys I want. Now let's see the other side. Well, it's not working, which is really annoying. Maybe I got to pop out to object mode. Let's go to face mode, Shift and click. It's going through to the other side. Click and drag. It's grabbing stuff on the other side. So backface culling is turned on. Right click, Polygon Display, toggle backface culling. I'll even jump back to object mode just to see if I gotta shake around Maya a bit. Go back to face mode. It's still wanting to grab these polys. Anyway, that should work, but it's not. Anyway, you can click and drag a box to make a selection of faces. I just want to start down here with these, but if you're going to click and drag a box, just make sure that you haven't accidentally selected some polygons on the other side. So I'm just going to deselect those. And then I'm going to use the Shift period, or the greater than symbol, to grow this out. Grow, 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 goo, grow. Cool. Right click. I'm going to assign myself an existing material. There we go. Assign an existing material, which is my text underscore glass. Good thing I named it nicely, because I know that's exactly the glass texture that I want to use. Yep, so this area down here and this area up here, they both have the same texture, which is awesome. Cool. Now we're left with these polygons in here where we're going to have our label. Now this is where we're going to do some UV unwrapping. Now, you have to imagine if you had this object and say it was made out of paper. Let's pretend it was made out of paper and you had an X-Acto knife and you could make cuts around this object to slice away this surface so that you could flatten these out to the best of your ability. We need to make cuts, and to do that we got to get into edge mode. Now, up here we have workspaces, and I've seen a lot of students hop up here into their shelves and they pop open this UV editor. And they try desperately to work with it floating on top. I've got it shelved right now because I prefer it like that. But a lot of folks I've seen will have the UV editor kind of floating out here like so. And that's really frustrating because you're shoving this left and right, and that's really annoying. I personally have my own setup. So I dock my UV editor there. I've got my UV toolkit here. I can get to my geometry and my UVs at the same time. Or what's even better is under here, under the workspaces drop down, we actually have a UV editing workspace. That's how important they are. And the object outliner goes away on the left-hand side, and we get a little bit more real estate to do our work, which is really awesome. Normally the UV toolkit is in focus, and that is great. Cool. So the first thing we want to do when we're doing UV unwrapping, kind of counterintuitive, because Maya will try its best to auto-magically create UVs. And I'll show you what I mean. Let me just put out a box here. And I'll move the box over here, and I'll scale it up just a little bit so that we can see what's going on. And so by default, you know, this box, if we were to go around the edges and cut it with an X-Acto knife and unfold it, it would look like this over here, right? Now, here's a big important thing to remember. Each one of these regions inside of this UV here is going to relate directly to one of these surfaces on the cube, obviously. Now watch what happens when I stretch my box, like so. You would think that the UVs should be updated auto-magically. They are not auto-updated. In other words, when I put a texture into this space here, which might relate to this face here, let me actually go into faces mode and we'll see exactly what I'm talking about. If I put bitmap data, if I put a picture inside of here, you can only imagine that this is going to stretch onto this face here. This is all going to be stretched out. We can even turn on our checkerboard pattern to see exactly what I'm talking about. And if you want to see a little preview of your UVs and what they're doing, you can click on that button right there. So while I'm stretching my geometry, the UVs aren't being updated automatically, right? So when I start to map bitmap information to my UVs, it's going to be stretched out on my geometry. So what I got to do is go to object mode, and once more under polymodeling, I need to freeze this thing, right? I need to freeze its transforms, but I need, more importantly, to delete its history and freeze its transformation. Now that still did not automatically unwrap my model perfectly. What I would still have to do is make the cuts all around the different edges and then ask the system to unfold it for me. So if you look carefully, you gotta look really carefully. You can see that there are thicker white edges around certain faces. Right-click face, this face here has got this white line around it. Now this white line relates directly to this edge here. Interesting. You know, I highlighted that one edge, and I can see that edge is this L shape in my UVs. That means that these two faces are going to fold and match up right there. What about this edge here? Make sure you're in edge mode. What about this edge? Where do you live? I'll highlight this guy here. What about this one? So those two are going to get merged together. That's where the two of them overlap. What about this edge here? So this is not a cut. This edge here is a fold. This is where it's going to fold. So when I highlight that edge, it's actually on the inside of my UV shell. Now I'm using that word. You right click, you'll see that there is an option in here for UV shells. This entire block is considered a shell. And when I start to take apart my my jar over here, you'll start to see how you'll get varying number of shells dependent upon the complexity of your UVs. So now that I've stretched this, and I'm going to go back to face mode, I'm going to select all of the faces, and it's great when you're looking over here in the UV editor. You can actually click on the faces in here and select them directly onto your geometry. Watch what happens now when I ask the system to do an unfold. And that's under my UV toolkit. I'm going to ask it to try its best to unfold based on the cuts that it already knew from the original cube, these white lines, these cuts. I'm going to ask it to unfold. Awesome. Now, it's rotated it a little bit, which is kind of strange, but that's okay because you can still use your move tool. You can use your rotate tool, and you can use your scale tool. Now what we're trying to do is to get this inside of this black box, the one that's got the numbers from 0 to 1, 0 to 1. So this is our U and this is our V. These are our UVs. We want to get this shell, this entire shell on the inside of that black box. I'm going to rotate it and put it in as best as I possibly can to get it straight. Now, nothing can possibly be stretched on each one of these edges because they literally match 1 to 1 in the appropriate scale to each one of these faces. So when I turn on my checkerboard here, like so, everything looks really, really nice. It looks really, really nice. And it's neat over here when you move the shell around. I'll grab my move tool. When I move it around, you see what's happening? You see the relationship? So right now, let me turn this off. This face here, where is this face on my object? It's over here. Cool. And I know when I zoom up here, and go back to the shell, because I want to move the entire shell. I don't want to just move the face. When I turn this on, you can see the letter U is now projected onto that one face there. Now if I move this around, I can move the shell around, I can put the number 1 on it. Well, watch what happens when I rotate this shell. I'm going to turn that off so I can see what I'm doing. The letter E for rotate. I'm going to spin this around, but I'm going to turn on my checkerboard again and rotate my UVs. I see it rotating around on the other side there. W key to move it. Yeah, it's awesome. It's so cool. And I do need to make sure, to the best of my ability, that my UVs are living inside of this black box that goes from 0 to 1. Otherwise, the texture will start to repeat across my object. And I can scale it to fit. Just tap the R key, the same old scale tool that we're used to when we're modeling, to pack this into this area here. Now there are tools down below for arrange and layout. We can ask this to lay out our shells, and that will come into play here in a minute. I'm going to press layout and see what it does. So it packed that over to the left-hand side and tried to fit it in just right. There's tons of great tools in here, like straighten your UVs. So I just clicked straighten and it just perfectly made them straight. Now these don't work perfectly all the time. We might have to do our own work. I like to shrink down the shell just a little bit to make sure that it's on the inside of a texture, because don't forget, this square is going to become the image texture that gets projected onto that object. Cool. I'm just going to hide this guy. Go back to object mode, tap the H key, and I'm going to hide it. I'm going to focus up now on my jar. Now by default, and I know a lot of people, so Maya, like I showed you with the cube, when I first put it out, it tried to unwrap it. When you create any shape in Maya, it's going to try its best to do UV unwrap. As you start to revolve geometry and things like that, it's going to do its best to do a UV unwrap. Now, to get things going, and I know a lot of people like to do this. I'm going to do what a lot of people like to do. I'm going to select all of my geometry. So I'm going to select all. People like to come over to the UV toolkit and they try to pick a projection that just, it's fast and easy. So they try to create something that's automagic. So just unwrap it for me. And what it's done is it's cut up my jar. All of the different polygons have been flattened out and they've been created into multiple shells like so, and that seems awesome. And it can be if, and only if, you're going to paint this object in something like Substance Painter. There's other tools. You can paint in Blender, you can paint in other tools as well. Because everywhere you see this white edge has just popped up, that is a cut. And that cut is going to become what's called a seam, and you're going to see the texture crack at that very edge. So this is not good. Right? So what we like to do, and there's a couple of ways to approach this. What I like to do, I will select all of my faces and I will just do a camera-based projection. So it's just a starting point. And what it does when you hit camera-based is all of these white lines, all of these cuts, and all of these seams will go away. And it will merge them all into one beautiful UV. Now that's great if you were going to project an image directly from the camera onto this. Say you took a photograph of a real peanut butter jar at this exact angle and you remodeled it perfectly. You can just project that photo using the camera, what we're looking through right now, and that's all fine and well. But by unifying all of our shells and putting everything back together again, we've got a really nice starting point to start thinking about unwrapping our object. Now, the only spot on this object that's going to actually have a texture coming in from another software like Photoshop and another bitmap image is going to be on this label. So that's really all I'm going to worry about. And as I apply the other procedural textures, the ones that are built into Arnold, I'm just going to use glass, for example. As we project those things onto the surface, we might find that there are other purposes to UV unwrap the rest. But we'll see if we need that coming down the pipe. So let's focus on just this area here. So I can highlight my polygons very quickly. I'm holding the Shift key down and double clicking on the nearest neighbor. So click, and then the one beside it with Shift, double click. Go below it, Shift double click, below it, and then go to the one to the right, Shift double click. And because my topology, because my geometry is so nice and awesome, then I have selected the region that I know I'm going to want to unwrap. But first and foremost, I have to cut apart my seams. I have to go into my edge mode here, and I've got to choose. I've got to think, if I were to cut away the polygons around that ring and straight down here and along the bottom here, then I could literally just flatten that out into a nice flat graphic. So I'm going to double click on this edge loop here, and I'm going to go over to cut and sew. And I'm going to click the cut button. And you'll notice when you hit cut, as we saw earlier, that goes bright white. It looks slightly different from everything else, indicating to us that there is a cut there. I need a cut down here. Now, don't get confused. When you make a cut, this isn't changing your geometry. This is just changing your UVs, okay? So that's very important to remember. And then I'm going to go straight down here, holding Shift, and just make a straight cut down there. Cut. You can see it in our UVs over here. Now, if I were to grab my faces, now that it's cut, and I hit unfold, I should be able to get a nice, flat, beautiful UV for that one projection. Now I could also, knowing full well that this is a cylinder, I could create a new UV shell using the cylindrical projection. That's pretty awesome. That's amazing. And that just fit beautifully around my texture. Now if I throw on the checkerboard, well, it looks to be kind of stretched. Well, let's not use cylindrical. Let's go back here. It's awesome. Once we've made a cut and we've got a shell, we can actually just highlight polys by grabbing the shell itself, which is so wonderful. And then I'm going to say unfold. Okay? Now, there are some options down here. We could say unfold along the U, which should arguably unfold it flat. And like I said, these don't always work. Well, it's doing its best. But maybe straighten the shell. Straighten it out. Straighten those UVs. Hey, straighten UV, beautiful. And nothing is stretched. If I go back to the shell, nothing is stretched. So when I put the texture back on here, and I'm going to get rid of these guys. I'm going to move these out of the way. This shell here, I'm going to get it out of the way with my move tool. I'm going to put it out of the way. And you can see it's already starting to cut my object up, which is pretty cool. Pretty cool. Now I scale that up and get it to fit beautifully right on my UV there. I'm going to position it and I'm going to turn on my texture. Et voila. That checkerboard is telling me that everything is looking a-okay. Now there seems to be some weird skewing over here because of the smoothing model. So what I need to do when I put this in my scene is just hide the seam in the background. I'm just going to put the seam that is stretched at the back of the object so nobody can see it, like that. That should do. Cool. Now my bottom, I may as well just fly through the rest of this process, and I will try to speed up this video so you can see how a pro might do it. So I think at this point, I've got all of my shells nicely optimized. Once more, I mean, I'm applying a procedural glass texture. Procedural means that the system is going to create the texture. I don't have to bring in a bitmap for it. I might apply some fingerprints later on, but for now it's okay. The places I'm probably going to position those types of details like fingerprints or dust is going to be outside of the object, maybe on the rim, for example. Yeah, so I might put some fingerprints out here. I definitely don't have to worry about, putting fingerprints on the back side of the object. And this is a still image, so the seam is going to be on the back side. That's why I decided as I was going through and cutting this all up. And some things to just review. On the inside, we've basically got a cylinder that can be flattened out very easily. I've got something on the bottom that is flat. Both sides. Did I flatten out the bottom? Did I grab that shell? Let me just double check here. This is what I do love about the shells, is you can highlight stuff in here and see it on your model. Did I not unwrap the bottom? That's its own shell. Where is it hiding? Oh, I did a planar map, that's why. So you may have noticed I clicked on that at one point when I was zipping through. That means there's just a flat plane projecting an image up onto the bottom here, but I'm just going to unfold it. What the heck? I'll click the unfold button and see what it does. Unfold. Let me do camera based on it. Yep, that projected from the camera what I'm looking at here. See what? I keep remodeling. Bad habit. So if whatever angle I'm looking at it, if I hit camera based, it'll project that view onto my UVs. But I'm just going to hit unfold here, and that should flatten it out nice and nice. So this guy, I'm going to rotate it as best as I possibly can, and see if the system won't do really nicely when I try to straighten my UVs. Try to straighten the shell, straighten the UVs. Yeah, does a really good job. Now, for the super awesome thing that, oh, maybe these guys too. Yeah, let's straighten those out. Takes a second. Oh boy, what am I not doing? I'm not saving my scene as. I'm going to save it as scene product shot 1. Maybe I'll follow my good habits, 001, and I'm going to start saving incrementally. I should have been saving all the way along while I was doing this. So yeah, I've got all of these different interesting moments just sort of hanging out. I've got some problem here, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. I've got one little glitchy thing up here. I don't know what that is, but I'm not going to worry about it. It's on the other side of the object, so I could spend a million years. This isn't perfectly lined up. I could flatten this one out. Maybe I will. Maybe I'll straighten the UVs and see what it does. No, forget it. I'll just leave it. It doesn't really matter. It's going to be procedural glass anyway, so that's fine. So I need all of these to be packed onto this one square, which is going to be representative of my texture. So everything's looking good. I turn my checkerboard on just to take a peek around, just to see, make sure that my checkers look good, but I'm also looking to see whether or not they're all of the same scale. And they won't be until I do this next cool move. I could grab them all and individually scale them and position them with my checkerboard turned on, but that's a little bit annoying when I can just simply say arrange and lay out Maya, which is so awesome. Just lay out my stuff. You'd figure it out. And it'll pack everything on in relative scale, so when you turn on your texture, everything should roughly be of the right size. Oh, so cool. Yes. So good. Tap the 3 key just to see what's going on with it in smooth mode. Everything's looking great. And this is ready for production. This is ready to rock and roll. I could send this up the chain and I could be proud of that. So that's the UV unwrapping of my of my jar. I'm going to turn the texture off. Now don't forget, before I had set some textures. I love this. UV shells, so I can say U and, not you, but U and U. And I'm just shift clicking on my shells over here because they do represent geometry, right? All of you all, I've done this once already, but I'll do it again. Right click, assign a new material. So all of you be shader under Arnold, a standard surface. Cool. Just doing this again for review. I want to also select this one in here, and it's nice to do this after you've done your UV unwrapping. I want you, I'll assign you a new material, and you're going to be a shader, standard surface. Right click, object mode, highlight your object, and just delete your history. Collapse that down, freeze your position, save your file, save. Nice. Now, this one up here, now I need to make sure I've got my two different shaders. I should see that up here, standard surface 3 and standard surface 2. Now it gets a little bit confusing because that's why naming things is so important. So let me go back to what I had done before. I'm going to highlight you. I wish it would change the node over here, but it's not going to. Right click. I had already produced the material. Whoa, Control Z. I'm going to highlight that shell. Right click, assign an existing material, and I'd already made texture underscore glass. So that's text glass. So this would be, I'm getting confused now. And this is the problem without naming things along the way. I won't lie, I am getting confused. So I'm going to go to Hypershade and start cleaning up my mess. There's certain things that you cannot delete. Like if I right click on this and tried to delete it, I wouldn't be allowed to. There's stuff that's just baked in. So texture glass, I'm going to delete you. AI standard, I'm going to delete you. AI standard, I'm going to delete you. I'll try to delete everything else, but it shouldn't let me because these are baked into the program. They need to exist. So I've just gotten rid of my textures and saying, oh, I'm fluorescent green now because I don't know what textures I have. So I'm going to right click, UV shell, select you, right click, and I'm going to assign a new material, Arnold shader, AI standard surface, and give it a name right away. This is my label. So text underscore label. So important. Okay. Double check. I tend to forget. UV shell, select you, NURBS to polyshape, text label. Cool. And you up here, so everything else. So if I select, I wonder if I can do this. Interesting move, UV shell, select. I wonder if I can select the inverse on my UVs. I love it. Everything else, I selected the inverse. Everything else, you are going to be right click, assign new material, shader, surface, AI standard surface, and I'm going to give it a name right away and call this text underscore glass. So this stuff's glass, and the other stuff is going to be my label. Now, I'm going to do a fancy move here. hopefully this goes quickly. I'm going to want to fill up my peanut butter jar with peanut butter. So how would I do that? Well, I can just use the existing geometry that I have. I'm going to duplicate it. I'm going to move it over here like so. And I'm going to think about these polys inside. We'll see if this works. Some faces. Highlight these ones. I have backface culling off. It's working now for some reason. And then I'm going to go Shift, grow it out, grow, up to about there. That'll be the top of my peanut butter. And then I'm going to select the inverse, and I'm going to delete them. Haha, that looks so strange. What's going on? Why is it I'm seeing through that object? Well, because my normals are flipped. So I select all. So all of my normals are pointing in the way they should be based on the other object. So I need to tell the mesh display to flip my normals. So often when you see your object looking completely black, you might need to have your polygonal normals reversed so that I flip it like that. Cool, super cool. Now there's no data on the inside. So what I'm going to do is say edge. I'm just going to highlight my edge and, oh yeah, surprise, there's an edge there. Interesting, cool. And then I'm just going to ask this, it might take me a second to find it because I don't use it very often, mesh. Now where are you hiding in there? I want to close the hole. Fill the hole. Haha, cool. So it just filled that hole that I selected. Now it's not the best topology in the world, but watch this cool factor. This is currently smoothed, right? I'm going to double click on my edge, like so. Now I want to harden that edge. So even though it's smooth, I want this specific edge to be creased. So under Edit Mesh, where do we find that? It's up here somewhere. Mesh Tools, another one we don't use very often. The Crease tool. Okay, so I'm going to make a crease on my smooth mesh. And it pops up and it says, select components and then click and drag with the, so this is the one I want to use, and then I click and drag with my middle mouse button to make that edge more of a crease. This one here. Now this is bad geometry right now, so I got to do the shift click all the way around. It's funny, it's transferred the UVs over here, so I'm seeing other stuff. And then I'm going to use the crease tool, last tool used, G key, and click and drag. Oops. Grab that one too, to click and drag to make that more of a crease against my smoothing model. Neat. Now it's got a little bit of funkiness up here at the top, and that's okay. What I should do actually is just merge all of those polys together. So I'm going to grab that edge. Do I have the select tool? I want my edges. Double click, shift double click to go around, not extrude, select my friend. Shift double click. Oh, this is that goofy edge. That's why. Because I filled a hole. I have to do this the hard way. This is what you get when you don't have great topology. And then I'm going to scale that down like so. And I'm just going to merge the points. Edit mesh. I'm going to merge to center. Like so. Yeah. And then W. I'm going to take that center point down. Cool. And that's going to be my peanut butter that goes on the inside. So I'm going to assign a new material, object mode. I'm I'm going to assign, actually, I'm going to get rid of all the UVs. Do I really care about the UVs? I don't care about the UVs because it's all going to be the same color. So object mode, I'm going to assign a new material, Arnold surface. I'm going to call this one texture underscore. This is my peanut butter. And it's going to be brown-ish. Cool. I'll come back to that later. Now I could try to make this fit perfectly inside of my jar. That's going to be tricky because look at where my pivot point is. Pivot point's in a bad place. So I'm going to go back to my general workspace up here, top right. And I'm going to shut down all these tabs. I'm going to go back into kind of modeling mode. Scene layout mode, F. Now I want to look at this from the top. I'm going to look at this from the top. Because from top mode, I can easily tap the D key and look at my snaps up here. I'm going to snap this to point. I'm going to snap this to the center like so. Cool. Tap the D key to get out of that mode. That was the move pivot mode. And do the same thing to my jar. That's being really snappy. D key, snap to point. Nice. Tap the D key, go back to perspective, and now those are both set up with their pivot points in the center. In theory, go up top again. I'm going to go into wireframe mode to do this next move. I'm going to snap to the grid and just snap this to the center like so. Same with this object. And what I'm trying to do is just get these two things perfectly centered off one another. There we go. Cool. Nice. Nice, nice, nice. That will work. File save. Now something that is often forgotten in the wide world of 3D is scale. How big is this object right now relative to the world? Now, under Preferences in Maya, you can see under Settings that I'm currently looking at the grid in centimeters. So each grid square represents 1 centimeter. So how tall is a jar of peanut butter? This is really, really big right now. So I'm going to need to shrink this down, but how small should I make it? Well, here's a powerful tip. If you press Control T, holding down Control and tap T, you'll get this other interesting tool pop up, the Transform tool, kind of like what you would expect in our good friend Illustrator or Photoshop. Control T. So this is telling me that it's currently 19 centimeters tall. So if I grab a corner and I start to draw, oh, that's frustrating. But similar to other programs, if I hold down Shift, neat, I can scale this down. And I think I'm going to go for this to be about 6 centimeters tall. Nice. Now, did it mess around with my pivot points? Let's see. I'm going to go back to my Select tool and see if it messed with my pivot points. Move tool. It did. Frustrating. So it scaled it in context to the geometry that was selected and left the pivot points. So I'd have to do that other move again. So I'm going to use just my eye now. I don't have to be perfect. This is art. So I'm going to undo. There we go. And instead of using that scale tool, the Control T, I'm just going to use scale, the R key, and scale this down. Make it as small visually as I want. Making sure that it's inside the grid. That's looking good. And this is going to help with our lighting here in a second. That's awesome. Cool. All right, so what do I want to do with my textures? Now in Arnold, I can start opening up my Hypershade and my text glass. Let's deal with that first. So I'm going to highlight that, double click on it. I can right click on it and graph the network, which is really cool. And I can see all the beautiful things that I can input as either files or procedurals. But I'm going to just say over here, there's a preset. Maybe there's a preset for, hey, glass, cool. And I'm going to replace the existing texture with this default glass texture. And it's going to set this up to have all of the right settings that I need to do my job. And primarily, it's transmission that got changed. So the weight of the transmission changed to 1 all the way. So glass is 100% transmissive. The other thing that's important is that its index of refraction is 1.52. Water's got a different index of refraction, and that talks about how light bounces inside of that object and comes out the other side, and that's going to influence the look of our render later on. So just by choosing that preset of glass, the IRR went to 1.52 and the transmission went to 1. So light is completely transmissive through this object. I close down Hypershade. Ooh, I don't see anything anymore. That's because it's completely transmissive. So I need to turn some stuff on up here. You can turn on textures. Nope, don't have any textures yet. I'm going to just turn on that button there, which is going to let me see my geometry. Cool. Throw the wireframe on if I want. This is really important. Cool. And really, I'm still in layout mode, so I don't really have to know that everything's, yeah. Anyway, I'm moving right along. One thing I like to show you in your view, under camera settings here, you can say, I want to see the safe action. And safe action will draw a box. It's tough to see it, but it'll draw, you'll see this little green edge, and that is telling you what is the viewable renderable area based on the current settings of the Arnold renderer. So I'm just going to throw on my render for a second. You'll see there's a problem. It's all black. I don't have any light yet. First things first, I'm going to put out a table top. I'm just going to use a plane. I'm going to scale that out like so, just so I have something to reflect light off of. And I could, well, I'll go for it. Arnold lights, Skydome light. Now to use Skydomes, we need what are called HDRI lights. And I like this website over here, polyhaven.com. And they've got, go to their website, all kinds of cool textures and models. So HDRIs, click on that. I was just using a studio, and I picked one of these that I liked a lot, and I put it into my project folder like so. And I am looking for an EXR file because it carries a little bit more data about exposure. So I'm going to Arnold Lights Skydome, and immediately under my attribute editor, I'm going to give that light a color, file, you've all done this before, and pick that EXR file. Now, if I can't see your external hard drive, you might have to type in volumes. I personally just recently grabbed the folder and dragged it into my folder bookmarks so I can get in there real fast. That's handy. And there is my EXR file. I'll load that in. Cool. So now what's important to know about environmental lighting like this, HDRI lighting, is that each one of these bright light sources is actually affecting the scene and behaving like a light, which is awesome. And yeah, you can see it now if you look very carefully. We've got this green box, and that's showing me my camera safe area. So under View, Camera Settings, Safe Action. There's Safe Title as well. So you can turn that on, you'll see a little other box on the inside, and that's usually telling the animator that text that could get laid up in this graphic for animation would go inside of this box for titling. Because you never know how deep the TV set or the computer monitor's bezel is, the edge of its screen, so it might come in a little bit farther. So this is safe. But it's nice to turn those on because you can actually see what it is you're going to actually be rendering. I'm just going to compose this just a little bit. I got some peanut butter in there. I got some glass surface out of there. And I'm going to go back and to my renderer and just hit it and see if I can get something. There we go. Awesome. Super cool. Very cool. Nice. Now, I got to get me a bitmap out onto that surface there. So I'm just going to take a moment to go hunt one down and join you back here in a second. So I just took a moment to find myself a texture that I can put out onto my peanut butter jar. And I'm just going to go with this Adams label. You want to be creative and make your own label, that's awesome. Just some things to point out. I want to make sure this has got enough resolution so that it doesn't look really pixelated when I put it on my object. There's an important concept to think of though, like what is really the screen space? In other words, when I render this, if my frame is going to be 4K, how much resolution is really needed on this label to make it look realistic? Well, first of all, I probably need to think about what is 4K resolution. And it is 3840 by 2160 pixels high. So in this shot, if this is going to be my composition, like something like, whoa, be careful. If it's going to be something like that, then I know that my screen safe area, my action safe area, my renderable area is going to be from this green line at the bottom to the green line at the top. So this area in here is really only going to be about 1/3 the size of my render. So I can take that number and divide it by 3 and sort of think maybe, you know, 700 pixels high is going to be good enough for my resolution for my label. So if I can just right click on that, I'm going to have to do some work over in Photoshop, but I'm going to just copy the image. If I do that, I might not get the resolution I need. So I'm going to open the image in a new tab, make sure I get the right resolution. That's going to be fantastic. Now it's in perspective, so I'm going to have to mess around with that a little bit inside of Photoshop, but that's good. That's good Photoshop practice. I'm just going to right click and copy the image to my clipboard. Now, back in Maya, I have to start thinking about positioning this onto those polygons using my UVs. Currently, I know that this shell here relates to where my label is going to go. So how do I accurately position the artwork into that shell? Well, powerful feature inside of Maya is this little snapshot button. Basically renders your UVs out into another file. So I'm going to take a UV snapshot. What resolution would be good for this? Let's go out at 2K. Sure. Well, 2K, is that good? I know that my entire jar in my screen space is only going to be, well, this is only going to be 700. Well, this is relative to my UVs is going to be, yeah, 2K might do it. We might have to do this over again if we're getting too low a resolution on the other side. Well, let's just go for it and see what happens. So I'll fire this out at 2K. What's my image format? Well, TIFF is really high resolution, but it's also really big. PNG, let's go PNG. What the heck? And I'm going to send out that specific tile, that first tile that I packed all of my shells inside of. Cool. And where do I want to put it? Browse, and let's find on my external hard drive out here in volumes, my project. Give it a name. This is going to be my, let's call it texture. Would that be a good name? Yeah, texture for my jar or label. And this is going to be its color. So it's going to be its albedo. There's another word for its color channel. So I might, after a while, have on the texture label another image that's going to be its normal map or its roughness map. Who knows? But right now I need to worry just about its color data. So save that up, and we'll see what happens when we hit apply and close over in our project directory. There we go. Nice. That's so cool. And it isolated that just nicely for us because I had the shell selected. That's awesome. So now we have a guide to work with over here in our good friend Photoshop. So let me see if I can't just drag this down onto Photoshop. Let me open Photoshop the long way. Good old Photoshop. Old friend, my hammer, as I call it. And I'm just going to right click, open with Photoshop. Cool. It does a beautiful job of making it transparent for me. It's kind of tricky to see out there in the world maybe, but I'll just zoom up here so that you can see that there are my, there's my geometry, there's my UVs. Cool. So now I can just paste it down like so. Nice. And I need to target that region. So maybe I'll just use my select tool and get rid of whatever noise I don't need. I'm not going to worry too much right now about whether or not it's perfect. I'm going to select the inverse and delete it out, and then deselect and transform that layer to fit on my UVs. Now, a little trick. It's not a bad idea to just go a little bit on the outside. Now, I don't want to make this bigger. I always want to make it smaller, so I'm just going to undo. In other words, I never ever want to scale an image bigger. I only ever want to make it smaller. So it's hard to see, but right down here, I'm just going a little bit outside of my UVs, just a little bit. Now, if I wanted to, I could spend a lot of time trying to get these words to fit in perspective, but I'm just not going to worry about that right now. I could do that for days. So once more, I'm thinking about keeping my texture just outside of the edge of my UV. That's all fine and well. Awesome. I'm going to move it over, holding down the Shift key. Little trick, select tool. Just going to grab a pixel on the edge here. I'm going to go to my transform tool, the V key, and then with my arrow keys, nudge right left. And that does a snap select, transform, and just stretch out those pixels. Let me just move that on over there. Oh, good old Photoshop. Gone are the days where it's going to want to transform it in all of the directions. Do not lock the width and height. There we go. It's all good. And I can be sloppy with this. It can go off to the side. It doesn't really matter. I'm not really satisfied with that terribly. So maybe what I'll do is just sample the color with the eyedropper tool and pick that off like so. Don't get a point sample, people. get yourself an average. Grab an 11 by 11 average. So I can grab a much bigger sample of that color there. Yeah. And then I'm just going to be sloppy. Doesn't really matter if it's over the edge because it's mapped to those areas on the geometry, so I can be sloppy. I'm going to create myself a new layer, put it behind there, fill it the right color, and then one little trick, I'm going to deselect that, go back to my label, eraser, I'm going to feather that out considerably, make its size real big, and then just start deleting that edge off of the Atoms label, like so. Shrink my brush down a bit. Doesn't need to be that humongous. I'm going to take that edge off. Just so it looks like it's married onto the surface there. And I'd take a lot more time if this was a professional job, but I don't want to waste your life watching me do photo editing. This is why knowing Photoshop is so incredibly important, because, you know, in the long run, understanding this tool, I call it my hammer. Like, it's always in my toolkit. Actually, now that I'm looking at it, I might actually, and I'm taking artistic license here, I'm just going to sample up this blue, this dark blue in here. And I'm going to go back to this layer and turn on its transparency and just make it a darker blue. And go up here, make my brush bigger and fade that out. Blend modes could work, all kinds of different fancy ways to do this would work. But that'll work, that'll be fine, I could belabor this. So I'm just going to send this out. I could bring in a PSD layer set into Maya, which is really cool. But I do have this as a PNG, so I'm just gonna crush all my layers and save this as a PNG, and now go back into Maya. I'm gonna switch back to my general UV editing mode. And I've got my texture glass up here in my attribute editor, and I'm going to change its color to file and then bring in that file from my project, which I called text label albedo. Turn on my textures. Hey, cool. Super cool. Now, I do want to keep my composition like this, so the solution would be very simple. Go back to object mode, grab my jar, and spin it around like so. Wee, spinny, spin, spin. Sometimes that's a terrible name. It's still called NURBS to Poly. This should have been called my, this is my jar, really. It's what it is. From time to time, you know, crush the history, set its transform, and its rotate is what I want to work on over here. So, yeah, looking pretty dang good. And if I want to be really specific, I could type in 170 over here. 150, 155, 157. I'm kind of when it comes to positioning something like this, I like to dial things in. Yeah, very cool. Very cool. All right, so I'm gonna turn off textures. Go back to this view. I know I've got it set up nice now. I'm gonna I'm gonna freeze its transform with the little snowflake up there. So that went back to 0 over here. So I know if I happen to rotate it, I can just set it back to 0, 0, 0, and everything will be nice and centered to my view. And I am thinking compositionally now by positioning the window a little bit out of frame and centering it up around this green background. Very cool. All right, so I've got lights, I've got a floor plane. Let me just rotate that so it's flat to the background like the original image I was copying. That looks great to me. Let me freeze that transform. Very cool. Now, what's left? A camera. So before we go to the camera, let's talk about the lights that are required for this assignment. Now, I'm looking for what are referred to as Arnold mesh lights. And in a studio, you might find what are called soft boxes in a photographic studio. And they could look something like this. And I just put a plane out in the scene, like that. And soft boxes tend to be square or rectangular. We turn snapping off here. And I'm just going to scale it up to make it look more like a studio softbox. Cool. I'm going to turn off all the fancy bells and whistles. I'm going to turn off textures. Actually, what I'm going to do is just hide my light, my HDRI light. I'm just going to hide it by highlighting it and tapping the H key. And then, with this rectangle that's come out into my scene now, I can turn it into a light. And the cool thing about these light sources, these Arnold mesh lights, you can take a sphere, you can take a model, you can model a light bulb out of glass, and you can turn that into a light source, which is awesome. Now, where that is in 3D space, it's going to be emissive in only one direction, in the direction of what we call its normal. So let's see, and it's always trial and error for me. I never really know. Usually when you create a poly like this and it shoots the light in the direction straight up. So yeah, highlight your polygon, and then under Arnold, lights, change that to a mesh light. And you'll notice over here in your attribute editor, in your outliner, if you don't see your outliner over here on the left, just want to point out that under Windows, it's here. Very important thing to have on. You'll see that that plane has just changed underneath to have in the set light underscore p plane 2. So that's now a light source. And it has everything you would expect from a light. So let's change its intensity up to 100. I'm just guessing right now. And this viewport up here, I'm going to make it really, really small. So to get into this view, I need to put my mouse over top of this window, tap the spacebar, and that's going to put me into quad split view. And then I'm going to tap F in this view, scroll out a bit, put my mouse over here into this view with it highlighted, make sure it's highlighted, tap F, scroll out a bit, scroll out a bit. And now we're going to start controlling the light. But in the perspective view up here, where I've started to think about my composition, I am going to turn on the Arnold renderer in this viewport. Now you might want to shrink this down because the smaller this viewport, I'm going to hit a save here. I'm going to file save scene because I know when I turn this on something could go wrong. So under renderer, I'm going to switch this to Arnold. Now this pops up, and I don't like my floaty windows, so I'm going to actually park it down here. Shrink that down so it's always available to me down here in the left. So in this viewport that's now got Arnold renderer for the viewport, I'm going to hit play. And I shouldn't see anything. Right? It's totally dark right now because this rectangle softbox, call it what you will, is now shooting light straight up into the scene. So I actually have to rotate it. So I'm going to tap the E key and I'm going to spin it around. There we go. So I can see it sending light down into my scene. And now in each one of my viewports, I can start doing a move to position it where I need it. And I'm thinking like a photographer now. I'm starting to think like I would if I were in a studio. And that's the best part about Arnold lights, is that you can treat these things like studio lights, like soft boxes. Now, right now, the rotation gimbal, it's kind of annoying to me right now because it's relative to the world. That's why the rotation gimbal handles are always aimed, they're perpendicular to the ground plane, or they're parallel to the ground plane or perpendicular to the ground plane. So what you might want to do, I'm going to undo that rotate that I did on the light and get it back to the beginning again when I first created it. And then I'm going to double click on my rotate tool. And I'm going to say rotate things about the object. Not the world, but the object. And the gimbals will start behaving slightly differently. So you'll notice here as I rotate this light, this rotation handle now starts to show me the direction in which the light is going. The move is fine. Probably do most of my movement from the top view. I'm just going to position it over here. I'm going to go back to rotate. Now, I would actually like to rotate it from the world view now, so double click. From the top, I would like to rotate it in world perspective, like that. And that's so awesome. And you can barely see it, but we're starting to get a highlight across the top. That's awesome. That's awesome. I can switch back to the objects rotation. I can rotate it right in the Arnold viewport, like so. And that looks awesome. Now I bet you when I highlight my world back here, my HDRI lighting system, the Sky Dome light, highlight that, Shift H to unhide it. Hoo-ah! Now we've got light coming in from behind, which is the skylight, and we've got light in the foreground doing its work, which is awesome. That's looking really good. I'm going to shut off my rendering in the viewport, and I'm going to save my scene, because whenever you turn on the Arnold renderer, things can go real bad. Now my workspace has changed. I wiggled some stuff around over here, so I'm just going to go back and I'm going to reset my current workspace, or I can just switch over to, say, UV editing, and then I can switch back to general if I want. Yeah, and that should clean up the workspace and split them off the way they should be now. Cool. So I'm going to look at this from the perspective view. Now, if I were in your shoes, I would think about adding a second one of these. Normally you'd have your primary light, and then you would have what's called your fill light. You might want to put one behind it to create what's called a rim light that would light around the top of the object, but we already got rim lights because the actual HDRI in the background is doing work on its own. So there's lots of photographic principles here that we can bring into the fray. But I got that nice highlight in the top right of my object, so I'm happy. So the next thing I need to do is think about bringing in my objects that I've downloaded from the internet. So another aspect of this assignment was to go out onto the internet and discover some files that you can download and incorporate in your scene. I love these people at TurboSquid. They've got some beautiful things like simple objects. If you wanted to, for example, find a fork and knife, chances are they've got one that you can download instead of having to model one yourself. Oh, this is searching in my own files right now. So let's go back to 3D models. I'll just type in fork. And yay, $19. So you gotta pay the peoples, or not. Some people are kind enough to give things away for free. It's awesome. So 19 bucks, but this whole set here is free. Now, not all of them are textured. Ooh, that looks really pretty, actually. I might just grab that one. So I'm gonna scoop that up, hit details. It tells me that it's a 3ds Max V-Ray 3D Studio file. So probably not going to work with Maya. I don't know of a way to import files that way. 3ds files from 3D Studio Max. This is still left in its Blender file format. So that's not going to work. Unless we opened it up in Blender and shot it out as a different file. That would be fine. 3ds Max plus 3ds OBJ. There's some wooden cutlery set in a box. It's 34 bucks. Anywho, search, or model your own. Old vintage fork. Ooh, Blender plus OBJ. Nice. Plus OBJ. If we have an OBJ file or an FBX file, then we're totally fine. Those will play nicely in the sandbox. So I'm going to add that to my collection. Ooh, scratches and imperfections. And ooh, look at that. This is going to hopefully have the texture set baked into it as well, into the file. So let's see. So free download, TurboSquid, awesome. You need to have an account. I've got a bunch of stuff that I've downloaded over time, stuff that I've learned from. And the fork fbx.rar or the 3ds.zip. Now I've learned a trick. The obj.rar, if I grab all of these things, then there's a chance that I might find in one file, like the zip file, the textures, where the FBX won't have it. The OBJ won't have textures. So the textures might be in that zip file. So let me scoop that. And I'll just take a look in Finder here and double click on the zip and see if that is just a 3ds file. So I think what this person has done is they're not using bitmaps for their textures. Instead, they're using, let's see here. Oops, quit. That's a RAR file. And on a Mac, you have to install the Unarchiver. Free program, awesome. The Unarchiver will open up our RAR, and that comes out as an FBX. So I'm just going to bring that into my project directory, and I'm just going to drop it. I'll just throw it in on root. Earlier I downloaded this piece of toast, and it's got some textures in it which are super awesome. I found that on TurboSquid. Ooh, weird. That's what toast looks like when it's UV unwrapped. Neat. All right, so let's get that into our scene. So back to Maya. First things first, I'm going to import my toast. And I'm always got to worry about scale, right? Because scale. It's a thing. And as I start to add more of these third-party files, it's more and more important for me to start saving my file more often, because this, for example, this toast that somebody else was kind enough to model up has lots and lots of geometry. So I'm going to jump into this side view here and double click on my rotation tool. I'm going to set it back to world, which is the default for the tool. You can always, for any tool that you've opened up, you can reset the tool. And now I'm just going to scale it down to fit into my scene. A toast makes sense for peanut butter. You know, some toast and some peanut butter. And I'm just being an artist, guessing where that should go in three-dimensional space. I'll throw it off over to the side there. Thinking about the composition. Cool, cool. And a knife would probably make more sense, but c'est la vie. I'm going to bring in my fork that I just downloaded. So file, import. And in my scene, one directory up is my fork. We'll see how big that is. It's funny. That's a big fork. Cool. And yeah, I'm just going to focus on that with the F key, E key to rotate it, and start thinking about where it should fit in the scene. I'm going to have to recompose my camera later on. That's fine, and shrink that down to be relative size to my shot. And now that I've got my toast, wouldn't it be nice if I had a plate? So I'm going to model a plate myself at the speed of business. And this time I'm not going to go to Illustrator to make me a plate. I am going to use curves up here using Bezier curves that are built in. Create NURBS curves, Bezier curve tool. And I'll just speed this up for you so you don't have to suffer through it. So yeah, this point on, I will speed it up. So Bezier curve tool. Okay, so now I'm back to texturing my toast. And the fine folks over at the Turbo Squid over here, they did a wonderful job of giving away not only the model, which is pretty high resolution, but they gave away their textures as well, which is great. And they even included normal maps, which give it bumps and stuff, which is awesome. And I'll show you how to use normal maps here as well. So I'm going to go back to the UV editor and just see what's going on there. Beautiful job. nice UVs. I don't know if they could be better, but they could be maybe better, but it doesn't matter. For the view, we're going to find the perfect angle for this toast on the plate. Notice the plate, I just used a ceramic texture. One of the quote-unquote, I keep using the term, but like I did here with the peanut butter, it's procedural, so it's just being generated by the system. I could go back in later and add fingerprints and dust and stuff, maybe as a nice touch. I'll do that later on. Okay, so this object here needs a texture, so I'm going to assign a new material, and that is going to be an Arnold shader, standard surface. And right away, I'm going to just take a look over here. I want to always press this button here and delete the history and simplify my object, which is awesome. Okay, So that's good, and I'm following my naming convention, TEX, texture underscore toast. Cool. And that's a terrible name for an object. I'm just going to call it toast. There we go. Toast shape, toast, toast, toast. Cool. Texture toast. All right. Now, I could go through this method of setting everything up this way, all of my files for my toast texture, or I can go into Hypershade. I'm going to click on that button, and you can see all of my textures are nicely named up in here. So I got texture toast up here. I'm going to right click on it and graph the network, and that's going to show me all of the potential inputs for this shader. It's called, known as my Arnold shader. Okay, so first things first, my base color is going to be a file. Puts the nodes out for me. Yay, super great. File 3, I'm going to select the file, and I'm going to pump in from my project directory toast textures, my diffuse, also known as albedo or color. Well, there's my toast texture, my base color. Cool. I have done this about 3 times, so I know for a fact that my roughness is, it's kind of ridiculous, my roughness is really high. So I got, or low right now, so it's shiny. So I'm going to crank that up to increase its roughness so it's not as shiny. It's not reflective toast, which was really funny earlier. And just, I could go on for days about how to set up, you know, all of these different channels, but one thing I do want to set up to make this look a lot more realistic is its normal map. So I could go pressing all the buttons in here on the right hand side, or I can start adding nodes myself on this interface here by right clicking anywhere in the dark gray space. I'm going to add a file node like that, just like we did here, and we can connect this to any of these channels that we want. I'm going to bump these out of the way, and I know in order to make this work, so a normal map will create the illusion of bumps and three-dimensional data where there actually isn't in the geometry. And there's a node that Arnold has, which is the AI. All Arnold shaders start with AI, normal map. And we can pump this file. Normal maps, we'll talk about them more in detail over the semester. But they look really funky. They look something like this. So it turns out that the data, the R, G, and B, the red, green, and blues, in the file actually controls pixel for pixel, up, down, and towards the camera. So X, Y, and Z, if you will. I shouldn't say towards the camera, that's inaccurate. It's X, Y, and Z order per pixel relative to the surface of the object, creating shadows in all of these little bumpy areas. So it's amazing technology that it works. So I'm going to fire that into the file node. Now, for the order this to work, it cannot be an sRGB color space. It has to be utility raw. So the raw data per pixel is being pumped into this AR normal map. So the out color goes into the input, and then the out value goes into the normal camera. And that's the setup for good old text toast, graph the network, cool beans. Now we can set up all kinds of different things, and we'll talk about these more as we go through the semester. But right now I just want to get this tutorial online for you all. So let me close this down. And my toast should be looking pretty sweet right now. Let me reset my workspace. Get used to playing around up in here. General workspace. It's looking really good. Yeah. Yeah, it is. I'm going to put my toast not into my plate. I'm going to look at it on the side there. This is where sometimes, you know, your wireframes are your friend. So I'm going to flip over to my wireframes and make sure it's sitting on the plate. not sitting through the plate. Cool. Now, last but not least but not last, I'm going to turn on my sky dome. I hit it before with the H key. Now Shift H to show it. I'm going to compose my shot to the best of my ability, and I'm just using the camera preview here. So the fork, it needs to be positioned over here. And I'm going to rotate it a little bit like so. This is the finicky stuff that I'm going to let you play around with on your own. I'm going to position that as best as I can right now. Chances are this view would help me out. And what I'm looking at, once more, view, camera settings, I've got safe action and safe title turned on. If I turn off safe title, then I can see the edges of my rendering area. Now don't forget, we're rendering this at 4K, so this is coming out at 3840 by 2160. Let's go back over here and set up file save. Now's a good time to save. Save all the time. Arnold settings. So I'm going to open the Arnold render view. Pop open the settings before I do that. And I'm going to head on down to my resolution here. 3080 by 2160. 3840. 3840. 2160. Print resolution, 72. Screen resolution, I should say. Screen resolution. Print resolution would be something like 150 these days, or 300 if you're going to super high res. So yeah, that should be, those are the settings for the assignment. Cool. Arnold renderer, we'll come back here at the end of it all and we'll crank up our anti-aliasing. We'll leave it like this for now, just so we can get through this and not burn out the system. But I do want to change my resolution now, because when I do that, it'll show me my safe area relative to the changes that I just made. This green box that's outlining my camera view. Now, I need to set up a camera in order to start doing this depth of field rendering that I'm asking for. How do I do that? I could set up a camera by creating one and then trying to move it around and stuff like that. Or, what's even faster, I'm in perspective view right here and I like the composition, so I'm going to hit View, Create Camera from the view. Nice. And the moment I do that, we're going to see one over here pop up called Persp 1. And when I highlight it, now we can really truly see what's going on with that safe area, that action area, I should say. And Persp 1, I'm just going to give it a good name. This is my main camera. Coolie. Now, main camera, I'm going to ask this to have depth of field. Now, a common mistake when we're using Arnold is to start messing around with these settings in here. And angle of view and focal length do change that perspective in Arnold. But depth of field is not managed here. It seems so obvious, but that would be for the built-in renderer. I'm going to collapse this stuff for now. We'll come back into camera details much, much later. But Arnold drop-down is where we need to set up DOF, depth of field. And we need to set up a focal distance. So how far away from this camera are we? And there is actually a camera now in the scene. If I take a zip back and I press the F key, there is my camera. I can see it from above here. I got a camera way back yonder. So how do I measure the distance between this and the object that I want to be in focus? Just try to figure out my depth of field settings here, my calculation. So awesome feature inside of Maya. Display, heads up display. Heads up display. here, I want to see in my viewports, maybe I want to see the poly count. That's helpful. And maybe I want to also set up in my heads-up display my object details. Cool. So now, when I go into my view here, neat. Nifty, there's back faces. So if I had gone in earlier, selecting things like that, back faces, not available. So in other words, there's nothing behind this selected. That would have been handy, a lot easier. Interesting. Object mode. Toast. How far are you away? What's your layer name? Distance from camera, 16.51. What about you? You are 14.74. So if I highlight my camera, I can type in that distance. 15, 14. It's got to have an aperture size, and this we just sort of tweak around. So I'm going to leave this at 0.5. We just play around with this to see what the result's going to be. It needs to have aperture blades. Cameras can have different number of aperture blades, so 6 or 8. We'll just set it to 6 for now and see what happens. File save. This is going to be a gnarly move that we do now. Arnold render. Cool. Let's bring up the entire rendering panel. All right. Coming back in after a hard crash. So this should finish off the tutorial. I'm just going to tweak the camera that we created. Just a quick reminder, once you have your viewports set up just right, view, you can create camera from view. And once you can do that, you highlight your camera, head into the attribute editor, make sure that you're going down into your Arnold settings here, and that's where you set up your depth of field. Because we are rendering with the Arnold engine, we got to go and enable the DOF there. How did we find out the focus distance? Once more, because of the crash, all my goodies turned off. Highlight your object underneath display, heads up display. Give me some object details. It tells me that it's 14.743. Go back, highlight your camera. I just threw in 15. We can mess around with that later. And then your aperture size is going to cause the image to look blurrier. So before I crash again, I'm going to hit save scene. I'm going to bring up the Arnold render window. There we go. And you see, I'll just crank up the aperture size real big. Oh, now we're starting to get into the world of photography. How close do we want it to the camera? Now we definitely want this Adams logo to be the thing in focus. So maybe what we could do, just as a trick, I'm going to press spacebar. Jump in on top here, and in between the jar and my camera, I'm just going to throw in a sphere. What the heck? And I'm going to put that sphere over here. And I'm going to shrink it real far down. I'm going to just make it really small. Now there's other things that we could use, like they're called null objects that are invisibles. But this is kind of a cheat. Where is that object relative to the camera? How far away is that little dot away from the camera? Ooh, it's 12.81. Let's put that little dot right in front of that Adams label, because that's what we really need to be in focus. 12.8. All right, 12.8. Let's highlight that camera. 12.8. Now in theory, the label should be perfectly in focus right now. I'm going to save. Save scene, Arnold. Now let us see that in the render view. Oh, that's so cool. That's awesome. Yep, our toast is totally blown out. But look, we just managed to find the focus right there on the atoms. So we know for sure that no matter what we do now with our aperture size, that's going to bring that into focus. I'm going to drop that back. We're shrinking our aperture size. So this would be more like, on a camera, we're going to like from f5.6 to f8, and then to f11, and then to f22. Because every time you shrink your f-stop, when the number gets bigger in your f-stop, the size of your aperture goes down. It becomes a smaller hole. So let's just decrease that right down. Yeah, you could play around with this for days. But that's how we set up the camera. And what's cool, when we're looking through the camera and the viewport, we know that from panels, perspective, main camera. When we move the camera around here, like so, when we move our viewport around like so, we are changing the position of the camera. We're moving the camera around because we're looking through it, which is awesome. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that. This is a really long tutorial, and I'm going to put little chapter markers all the way through. But yeah, we'll come to class and we'll finish this up. I'll put some dust and scratches and stuff on things and mess around with that for class. File, save scene. And let's just, yeah, I'll bring it to class and I'll do a big render there. Save it up. Don't forget to save. All right, have fun, y'all.